The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excited whispers as the first human delegation prepared to enter. Giant screens along the curved walls showed the approaching human ships, which appeared as mere specks against the backdrop of the Council's enormous defense fleet. Are those really their ships? A deep laugh echoed through the chamber. They look like escape pods. The speaker, Ambassador Green of the Torlan Empire, didn't bother to lower his voice. His massive frame, covered in ceremonial armor, shook with amusement. The main doors slid open with a soft hiss. Captain James Miller led the human delegation into the chamber, his confident stride and straight posture showing no reaction to the poorly hidden smirks and chuckles around him. He wore a crisp blue uniform with gold trim, his medals catching the light as he walked. Behind him, 3 other human officers followed, their faces equally composed. The council leader, a tall being with silvery skin named Morris, raised his hand for silence. "Welcome, representatives of Earth. We are interested in discussing your application to join the Galactic Council." His tone carried a hint of amusement that he tried to hide. Captain Miller bowed slightly. "Thank you for having us. Earth is honored to be considered for membership." A hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a size comparison between various council members' ships and the human vessels. The difference was striking. The smallest council ship was at least 5 times larger than the largest human ship. Ambassador Green couldn't contain himself. "Forgive me, Captain Miller, but how do you expect to contribute to council defense with such tiny vessels? My personal yacht is larger than your flagship." Several council members laughed openly now. Captain Miller remained calm, though a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Size isn't everything, Ambassador," Miller replied. "The HNS Thunderbolt may be small by your standards, but I assure you she's more than capable." "Capable of what?" another council member called out. "Delivering messages." More laughter filled the chamber. Council leader Morris tried to restore order, but he was fighting his own amused smile. Miller stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "Our ships are the product of centuries of human innovation. We believe in efficiency over size. Each vessel carries advanced shield technology, weapon systems, and engines that might surprise you." "Surprise us." Ambassador Green wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. "The only surprise is that you made it here without being mistaken for space debris." The human officers behind Miller tensed slightly, but their captain remained perfectly composed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, no bigger than his palm. "This contains the specifications of our fleet," Miller said, placing it on the central platform. "We're happy to share this information as a show of good faith." The device projected detailed schematics into the air. For a moment, the council members studied the data, their laughter dying down as they began to notice unusual readings. "These power outputs." Council leader Morris leaned forward, his amusement fading. "They can't be correct." "I assure you they are," Miller replied. "Every measurement is accurate and verified." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Emergency lights flashed as a council aide rushed in, his face pale. "The Drachnid Empire," he shouted. "They've broken the peace treaty. A massive fleet is heading toward council space." The chamber erupted in chaos. Council members jumped to their feet, shouting questions and demands. Only the human delegation remained calm. Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Council leader Morris, if I may. Earth would be willing to assist in the defense of council space. Consider it a demonstration of our capabilities." Morris looked from the tiny human ships on the display to the approaching Drachnid fleet. He seemed torn between desperation and disbelief. "With those," Ambassador Green scoffed, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Against Drachnid warships." Miller's smile widened slightly. "Yes, Ambassador. With these, sometimes the smallest tools are the most effective." The council chamber fell silent as the members exchanged uncertain glances. They had mocked these humans and their tiny ships, But now, facing a real threat, they began to wonder if perhaps they had judged too quickly. The next few days would show them exactly how wrong they had been. The emergency council session stretched into its fourth hour. Reports of the advancing Drachnid fleet filled the giant screens around the chamber. Each update brought worse news: more ships, bigger weapons, faster approach. Captain Miller stood at the back of the chamber, watching the council members argue. Their earlier mockery had vanished, replaced by fear and desperate planning. Ambassador Green, who had laughed the loudest at human ships, now looked like he hadn't slept in days. The Drachnids have over 300 warships. Council Leader Morris's voice boomed across the chamber. Each one bigger than anything we have. They'll reach our outer colonies in less than 2 days. What about our defense fleet? Someone shouted. Morris shook his head. Most of our ships are too far away. We can only gather about 50 vessels in time. He paused, his silver skin seeming to dim. It won't be enough. The chamber fell silent. Then Ambassador Green stood up, his massive frame trembling slightly. What about the humans? He asked, struggling to get the words out. They offered to help. All eyes turned to Captain Miller. He stepped forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. Our offer stands, Miller said calmly. We have 30 ships ready to join your defense fleet. A bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. 30 tiny ships. The speaker was Admiral Jones of the Council Defense Force. The Drachnids will mistake them for missiles and swat them away. Miller pulled out a small tablet and connected it to the main display. The screen showed a detailed battle plan, with the small human ships positioned in unusual formations. We don't need size to be effective, Miller explained. Our ships can move in ways yours can't. We can get closer, hit harder, and survive longer than you might expect. Impossible, Admiral Jones scoffed. No ship that small could carry enough power for sustained combat. Miller tapped his tablet again. New information appeared on the screen. Power readings, weapon specifications, and shield strengths. The numbers made several council members lean forward in surprise. How? Council Leader Morris whispered. How did you fit such powerful systems in such small ships? Human engineering, Miller replied simply. We learned long ago that bigger isn't always better. While other races built bigger ships, we focused on making everything smaller, faster, and more efficient. Ambassador Green stood up, but surely against the Drachnids. A loud alarm cut him off. The screens flashed red as new data poured in. The Drachnid fleet has increased speed. An aide shouted, They'll be here in 24 hours. Panic spread through the chamber. Council members jumped to their feet, shouting and arguing. Some called for immediate surrender, others for evacuation. Miller's voice cut through the chaos. Council Leader Morris, we need to make a decision now. Will you accept our help? Morris looked around the chamber at his frightened colleagues, then back at the human captain. What exactly can your tiny fleet do against such overwhelming numbers? Let me show you, Miller said. He pressed a button on his tablet. The main screen changed to show a live feed from space. The human ships were launching from their docking stations. Despite their small size, they moved with incredible grace and precision. Their formation was unlike anything the Council had seen before, not the rigid lines of traditional fleets, but a fluid, almost organic pattern. Beautiful, someone whispered. They move like dancers, another added. Admiral Jones stepped closer to the screen, his professional interest overcoming his skepticism. Those maneuvers, they should be impossible at any size. Miller smiled slightly. Nothing's impossible if you think differently enough. Our ships don't fight like yours because they're not built like yours. The Drachnids expect big, slow targets. They won't expect what we're bringing. Council Leader Morris stood up straight, seeming to come to a decision. Very well, Captain Miller. The Council accepts Earth's assistance. He paused, then added quietly. And we apologize for our earlier behavior. Apology accepted, Miller replied. Now let's prepare for battle. The Drachnids think they're facing a group of primitive races with outdated ships. His smile widened slightly. Let's show them how wrong they are. The chamber watched in stunned silence as more human ships emerged from their carriers, their small forms gliding through space like silver fish in a dark ocean. Tomorrow, they would face the mighty Drachnid fleet. Tomorrow, size would meet innovation, and the galaxy would never be the same. The command center of the council station hummed with nervous energy. On the massive central screen, hundreds of red dots marked the approaching Drachnid fleet. The smaller cluster of blue dots representing the council ships looked painfully inadequate in comparison. The tiny green dots, the human ships, were barely visible at all. Captain Miller stood at the main tactical station, reviewing final battle plans with Admiral Jones. The Admiral's attitude had changed dramatically over the past day. He no longer mocked the size of human ships. Instead, he watched their movements with growing respect. "Your ships just completed another patrol," Jones said, pointing to the screen. "I've never seen anything move so fast or turn so sharply. How do your crews survive the G-forces?" Miller smiled. "They don't have to. Our ships are fully automated. The crews stay in zero pods filled with shock-absorbing gel. The ships can pull maneuvers that would kill any crew in traditional seating." Before Jones could respond, new alerts flashed across the screens. The Drachnid fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel. For the first time, the Council got a clear look at what they faced. The main screen showed the Drachnid ships in detail. They were massive, brutal things, each one looking like a floating city made of black metal and weapon ports. The smallest Drachnid ship was bigger than the Council's largest cruiser. "By the stars," Ambassador Green whispered from his observation post. "Look at the size of them." The Drachnid command ship alone was nearly 20 kilometers long. Its shadow could have covered an entire city. Weapons bristled from every surface, and its hull was scared from countless victories. A transmission cut through the tense silence. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to the Drachnid fleet commander, a massive being with gray, armored skin and eyes that glowed with contempt. "Attention Council forces," the commander's voice boomed. "Your pathetic fleet cannot hope to stand against us. Surrender now, and we may spare your civilian populations." Council Leader Morris stepped forward to respond, but Captain Miller raised his hand. "Let me," Miller said quietly. "I think it's time they learned about humanity." Morris nodded, and Miller stepped into view of the transmission. The Drachnid commander's eyes narrowed. "What is this? You sent a tiny creature from an unknown race to speak for you." "I'm Captain James Miller of Earth," Miller replied calmly. "And I'm here to give you one chance to retreat." The commander's laughter shook the speakers. "Retreat? From what?" "Your toy ships." The camera panned to show a view of the human fleet. "What can those tiny vessels possibly do against our might?" Miller's expression didn't change. "Why don't you come closer and find out?" The transmission cut off abruptly. On the tactical display, the Drachnid fleet began to move forward. "All ships, battle positions," Miller ordered. The human vessels moved with incredible precision, forming what looked like a delicate web in space. The Council ships took up their assigned positions behind them, still unsure about this strange battle plan. "Captain," Admiral Jones said quietly, "I study your tactical display. Even with your ship's amazing mobility, I don't see how this formation can work. The Drachnids will simply power through it." Miller turned to face the gathered council leaders. "Tell me," he said, "do you know why humans made our ships so small?" They shook their heads. "Because we learned something important early in our space age," Miller continued. "The bigger something is, the harder it is to protect it completely. The Drachnids built their ships massive because they think size equals power, but they left themselves vulnerable to something they never considered." "What's that?" Ambassador Green asked. "Precision," Miller replied. "Our ships aren't small because we can't build bigger ones. They're small because this is the perfect size for what they're designed to do. The tactical display beeped. The Drachnid fleet was almost in range. "Watch closely," Miller said, turning back to the screen. "You're about to see why humanity chose quality over quantity, efficiency over size, and skill over brute force." He pressed a button on his console. All across the human fleet, panels began to open, revealing weapons unlike anything the Council had ever seen. "All ships," Miller commanded, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's technological achievement. "Battle stations. Let's show the galaxy what small ships can do." The next few minutes would change the Council's understanding of warfare forever. The first shots from the Drachnid fleet lit up space like artificial stars. Massive energy beams, each powerful enough to crack a planet's crust, streaked toward the human formation. The Council members watching from the command center held their breath. No ship that small could survive such firepower. But the human ships didn't try to survive it. They simply weren't there when the beams arrived. "Impossible," Admiral Jones gasped as he watched the tactical display. The human fleet moved like a swarm of insects, each ship flowing around the deadly beams with perfect precision. Not a single shot found its target. Captain Miller stood calmly at his station. "All ships, execute attack pattern Delta. Show them what we can do." The human fleet suddenly broke formation. Instead of staying in their defensive web, the tiny ships accelerated toward the massive Drachnid vessels. Their speed was incredible. The tactical computers could barely track them. "They're going to get crushed," Ambassador Green shouted. "The Drachnid point defense guns will." He stopped mid-sentence. The point defense guns of the Drachnid ships were firing, but they couldn't track the human vessels. The tiny ships moved too fast, changed direction too quickly. It was like trying to hit shadows with a spotlight. Then the human ships opened fire. Their weapons weren't the massive energy beams favored by the Drachnids. Instead, precisely targeted particle beams, no wider than a finger, sliced through the massive warship's shields like they weren't there. "How?" Council Leader Morris whispered. "Those shields can stop anything we have." "Size isn't everything," Miller replied, his eyes on the battle. "Our beams are focused to a microscopic point. All that energy in such a tiny area. No shield can stop that kind of concentration." A massive Drachnid cruiser tried to turn, to bring its main guns to bear on the human ships harassing it. But it moved so slowly compared to its tiny attackers. The human vessels darted around it like flies around a wounded bear, their precise shots cutting deep into its hull. "Look." Admiral Jones pointed at a new display. "Their ships are targeting specific points. Power conduits, weapon systems, engine controls. They're not just attacking, they're performing surgery." The Drachnid fleet was falling into chaos. Their rigid battle formations, designed to fight equally large ships, were useless against enemies they couldn't hit. Their massive weapons, meant to destroy capital ships with single shots, couldn't track targets moving so quickly and unpredictably. A transmission cut through the battle noise. The Drachnid commander's face appeared, no longer showing contempt but rage and confusion. "What sorcery is this?" he roared. "What are these demons you've unleashed?" "Not demons," Miller replied calmly. "Just humans who learned that bigger isn't always better." The commander's response was lost as his ship's main power went down, cut by precise shots from 3 human vessels that had slipped through his defenses. In the command center, the council members watched in awe as ship after ship in the Drachnid fleet went dark. The human vessels moved with impossible grace, their attacks precise and devastating. What had seemed like a hopeless battle was becoming a one-sided demonstration of superior technology. "Captain," Admiral Jones said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We thought size meant power. We were wrong." Miller nodded, but his attention was on a new threat developing. The Drachnid flagship, frustrated by its inability to hit the human ships, was charging its main planet killer weapon, a beam that could vaporize continents. "All ships," Miller commanded, Execute Maneuver Omega. Take out that weapon before it fires. The human fleet move is 120 small ships flowing together like mercury, slipping through gaps in the Drachnid defenses that larger ships could never have used. Their precise beams struck simultaneously, and the massive weapon exploded in a spectacular display of light and energy. The battle was turning decisively. The mighty Drachnid fleet, which had seemed invincible hours ago, was being systematically taken apart by ships they had dismissed as toys. And in the command center, those who had once mocked the tiny human fleet watched in stunned silence, learning a lesson they would never forget. Sometimes the smallest opponent can be the most dangerous. The battle entered its second hour, and the Drachnid fleet was in complete disarray. Their mighty warships, once arranged in perfect formation, now scattered across space like broken toys. The human ships pursued them relentlessly, their precise attacks never missing a target. "Look at this," Admiral Jones said, pointing to a tactical display. "They're not just fighting, they're dancing." He was right. The human ships moved in perfect coordination, as if guided by a single mind. When one ship attacked, others were already moving to protect it. When the Drachnids tried to concentrate fire on a single human vessel, the entire formation shifted to scatter the threat. "It's our battle eye," Captain Miller explained. "Each ship has its own artificial intelligence, but they're all connected. They think and move as one." A massive explosion lit up the command center screens. One of the largest Drachnid battleships had just lost its main reactor. The human ships responsible for the attack were already gone, moving on to their next target before the explosion even began. 30 ships, Ambassador Green muttered, shaking his head. 30 tiny ships against 300 giants. And they're winning. The Drachnid commander's voice boomed through the command channel again, but this time it carried a note of panic. "What are these demons? Our sensors can't lock onto them. Our weapons can't hit them." Miller pressed a button on his console. "All ships, initiate Phase 2. Deploy quantum torpedoes." New weapons appeared from hidden bays in the human ships. They looked tiny compared to the massive missiles the Drachnids used, each one barely larger than a human. "Those." The Drachnid commander laughed, but his laughter had an edge of hysteria. "Those are your secret weapons. Size isn't everything," Miller replied calmly. "Fire." The quantum torpedoes launched. Unlike normal weapons, they seemed to flicker in and out of existence as they flew. The Drachnid point defense systems couldn't track them. How do you shoot something that exists in multiple places at once? The torpedoes struck home. Where they hit, Drachnid ships simply disappeared. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where mighty warships had been moments before. "By all the stars," Council Leader Morris whispered. "What kind of weapons are those?" "Quantum phase shifters," Miller explained. "They don't destroy ships. They shift small sections of them into another dimension. When you cut a ship into pieces and scatter those pieces across different realities, well, it's very effective." The remaining Drachnid ships began to retreat. Their massive engines flared as they tried to escape, but the human ships were faster. Much faster. "All ships, execute Maneuver Sigma," Miller commanded. "Don't let them escape to warn others." The human fleet split into 3 groups. Their formation looked like a net made of starlight, closing around the fleeing Drachnids. More quantum torpedoes launched, and more massive ships vanished from space. In the command center, Admiral Jones studied the battle data with growing amazement. "Your ship's power output. It's impossible. How can something so small generate so much energy?" Miller smiled. "We learned to harness zero-point energy centuries ago. Each of our ships carries a generator that taps into the quantum fabric of space itself. Unlimited power in a package smaller than your desk." The last Drachnid ships were cornered now. The human fleet had them surrounded, their precise weapons cutting off every escape route. The Drachnid commander's final transmission was filled with fear. "We surrender. Please, we surrender. All ships, cease fire. Miller ordered. The human fleet stopped their attack, but maintained their position, their formation as perfect as ever. In the command center, silence fell as the council members tried to process what they had just witnessed. A fleet of tiny ships had just defeated one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Ambassador Green, who had once laughed at the size of human ships, stepped forward. "Captain Miller," he said quietly, "I believe we owe humanity a great debt, and an even greater apology." Miller nodded. "Accepted. But the battle isn't over yet." He turned to face the tactical display. "We still need to decide what to do with our prisoners." The council members exchanged glances. They were starting to realize that they weren't just dealing with a new member race. They were dealing with a power that could reshape the galaxy. And it all came in very small packages. The council chamber felt very different from 3 days ago. Where there had been laughter and mockery at the human ships, now there was only stunned silence. Captain Miller stood at the center of the room, delivering his victory report. "The Drachnid fleet has been completely neutralized," Miller explained, his voice calm and professional. "We captured 30 of their ships intact. The crew are being held in containment fields. The rest of their fleet—" He paused. "Well, they're scattered across several different dimensions now." Ambassador Green, who had once laughed the loudest at human technology, now leaned forward eagerly. "And your fleet's casualties? How many ships did you lose?" Miller's slight smile made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "None. None." Admiral Jones stood up. "You faced the most powerful fleet in known space, and you didn't lose a single ship." "We had some minor shield damage on 2 vessels," Miller replied. "They're already repaired." The massive screens around the chamber showed the human fleet, now arranged in a perfect formation around the captured Drachnid vessels. The tiny ships looked even smaller next to their massive prisoners, making their victory even more impressive. Council Leader Morris cleared his throat. "Captain Miller, I believe I speak for the entire council when I say we were wrong about humanity's capabilities." "Completely wrong," Ambassador Green added. "We thought size meant power. We laughed at your ships." He stood up, his massive frame bowing slightly. "I personally insulted your fleet. I apologize." Miller nodded gracefully. "Apology accepted. We're used to being underestimated. It happens on every world we visit." "About that," Admiral Jones said, stepping forward. "Your ships, they're not your most advanced vessels, are they?" The room fell silent. Miller's smile widened slightly. "No," he replied. "These are our standard patrol vessels. Our actual warships are somewhat more capable." He pressed a button on his console. The screens changed to show a new image. A massive space station appearing out of nowhere near the edge of the system. It was elegant and sleek, despite being larger than anything the Council had ever built. "Our main fleet carrier," Miller explained. "We kept it cloaked during the battle. It carries 500 ships, each one more advanced than the ones you saw today." The council members stared in shock. Ambassador Green's mouth opened and closed several times before he could speak. "You have 500 more ships, each one better than the ones that just defeated the Drachnid fleet." "This is just one carrier," Miller replied calmly. "Earth has 20 of them." The chamber erupted in excited whispers. Council Leader Morris raised his hands for silence. "Why show us this now?" he asked. "Because trust goes both ways," Miller answered. "You trusted us to help defend against the Drachnids. Now we trust you with the knowledge of our true capabilities." He paused. "And because the Drachnids won't be the last threat you face. The galaxy is becoming more dangerous. You need allies who can help protect you." "Allies?" Admiral Jones laughed, but it was a laugh of amazement rather than mockery. "Captain, after what we've seen, I think we'd be happy to be your junior partners in any alliance." Miller shook his head. "That's not how humanity works. We believe in equal partnerships. Yes, our technology is more advanced in some areas, but we have much to learn from you as well." The screens changed again, showing the human ships beginning to repair the damage to Council stations and colonies. Their efficiency was remarkable. Work that should have taken months would be completed in days. Council leader Morris stood. "Captain Miller, I have a proposal. Would Earth be interested in becoming a full member of the Council, with all rights and privileges that entails, including a seat on the Defense Committee?" Ambassador Green added quickly. Miller looked around the chamber, at the faces that had laughed at his ships just days ago. Now they looked at him with respect, even admiration. "Earth would be honored," he replied. As the chamber broke into applause, Miller allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest packages really did contain the biggest surprises, and humanity was just getting started. 1 month after the battle with the Drachnid fleet, the Council space looked very different. Human ships, once mocked for their size, were now a common and welcome sight. Their presence brought a sense of security that the massive Council vessels had never managed to provide. Captain Miller stood at the observation deck of the newly rebuilt Council station, watching ships come and go through the busy space lanes. Below him, a group of Council engineers studied a deactivated human defense drone with the excitement of children opening presents. "Still hard to believe how much has changed," Admiral Jones said, walking up to join him at the window. "A month ago, we thought your ships were toys. Now everyone wants one." Miller nodded. The Council's shipyards were already being redesigned with human assistance. The massive, clumsy warships of the past were being replaced by smaller, more efficient vessels. "The new Joint Patrol Fleet launches tomorrow," Miller said. "First-time Council crews will serve on human-designed ships." Through the window, they could see one of the new vessels. It was larger than standard human ships, but much smaller than traditional Council warships. Its sleek design combined the best of both cultures, human efficiency with Council durability. "Times are changing," a deep voice said behind them. Ambassador Green approached, looking quite different from the arrogant official who had mocked human ships weeks ago. "The other races are starting to copy your designs. Everyone wants smaller, faster ships now." Miller smiled. "That's good. The galaxy is a dangerous place. The more races that adapt, the safer we'll all be." A flash of light caught their attention. Outside, a massive portal opened in space, one of the new human-designed quantum gates. A ship emerged, but not a small one. It was huge, elegant, and clearly of human design. "Ah," Miller said, "right on schedule." "What is that?" Admiral Jones asked, staring at the massive vessel. "The HMS Horizon," Miller replied. "Earth's diplomatic flagship. It's carrying our new ambassador and the technical teams who will help upgrade your defense grid." Ambassador Green studied the ship with professional interest. "It's much larger than your military vessels." "Size has its place," Miller explained. "Our warships are small because that makes them more effective in combat. But a diplomatic vessel needs space for meeting rooms, living quarters, research labs, and cultural exchange centers." The Horizon glided gracefully into dock, despite being larger than most Council ships. Its hull gleamed with a pearlescent shine that seemed to shift colors as it moved. "Beautiful," Jones whispered. "And completely unarmed," Miller added. "The Horizon carries no weapons. It's a symbol of peace and cooperation." The observation deck's door slid open, and Council leader Morris rushed in, looking excited. "Captain Miller, the results just came in from the joint military exercises. The new hybrid ships performed beyond all expectations. And the crews." He paused to catch his breath. "The crews are requesting permanent assignments. They don't want to go back to the old ships." Miller nodded. "Change can be difficult, but once people see the benefits." Speaking of benefits, Ambassador Green interrupted. "The trade reports are amazing. 17 races have already requested technology exchange programs with Earth. They're offering resources, cultural artifacts, even star systems in exchange for your ship designs." "Earth will honor all reasonable requests," Miller said. "But our goal isn't to dominate. We want to help everyone advance together." They watched as more ships arrived through the quantum gate, human vessels of all sizes, each designed for a specific purpose. Small, agile warships flew protective patterns around massive research vessels. Tiny courier ships darted between larger cargo haulers. "You know," Admiral Jones said thoughtfully, "a month ago, I thought I knew everything about space warfare. Big ships, big guns, big shields." He shook his head. "Then your tiny fleet arrived and changed everything we thought we knew." Miller smiled. "That's the funny thing about progress. Sometimes it comes in unexpected packages." Outside, a group of council cadets was receiving their first tour of a human ship. Their excitement was visible even from the observation deck. The future was changing, and they all wanted to be part of it. "To the future," Council Leader Morris said, raising a glass. "May we never again judge by size alone." "To the future," they all echoed. And in space around them, the tiny ships that had changed everything continued their patrol, protecting the peace they had helped create. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was a very good thing.